Now give it maybe a minute, a few seconds, okay?
Teachers will walk out, close Colorado's third largest school district tomorrow. Tonight, it's a threat to publish their names. It's drawing.
Happy snow day. We're going to give people a few minutes to enter from the waiting room. I'm Ronli Liao. I'm the mental health and chief for Children's Hospital of Colorado. It's a pleasure to have you all on the call tonight. So we'll give everybody a couple minutes to get settled in from shoveling, or getting home, or getting to the office, or wherever you're heading. For those of you who are just joining us, welcome to the Mental Health Town Hall. We're excited to have you all joining this virtual Zoom. Thanks so much for making the time. I know it's really stressful, especially as family members and parents and busy folks. So welcome to the call. We'll get started in just a minute. All right, I know we have a pretty packed agenda, so we'll probably get started and people will catch up. This is all going to be recorded as well, so be looking for that on your social media sites. So my name is Ronli Liao. I'm a child psychiatrist. I'm the mental health in chief for the Children's Hospital of Colorado, and I am joined by an esteemed panel of team members from the Children's Hospital as well, and we'll introduce ourselves in just a moment. I would love to give you just a couple of housekeeping details before we get started into the program. One is this legal disclaimer. If you could take a quick look, that this is really meant to be an educational and an informational session. The information that we provide tonight does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. If you have direct questions, please go to your primary care doctor, or school health counselor, or nurse, and we're just hoping that you get some pearls for your family tonight. So take a quick look at that. Also, I'm really excited to say that tonight's program will be translated in our live stream in Spanish. So thanks so much to our interpreters. If you are joining us in Spanish, here are the instructions. You'll want to go to the interpretation globe at the bottom right of your screen on the Zoom screen. Choose Spanish, enter the chat room, and you'll hear our presenters in English at 20% volume and Spanish at 80% volume. So thank you so much for joining us in Spanish as well. Again, we are recording this town hall, so if you miss any of it, don't worry, you can find it again and share it with friends. You will all be muted, just so that we can keep the conversation clear. But feel free to drop chats in the chat box, ask questions. We'll have a live Q&A at the end. Here is our packed agenda. And we're looking forward to a great discussion tonight. So So as I mentioned before, my name is Dr. Ronli Liao. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I am the mental health in chief for the Children's Hospital of Colorado and also a professor of child psychiatry in the Department of Psychiatry at the School of Medicine at the University of Colorado. We are going to tell you a little bit about ourselves. We've got a great panel, and we're going to share a little bit so you get to know us about how COVID has impacted us personally and professionally. And I think it'll be safe to say that I would not even be in Colorado if not for COVID. I have 3 kids, ages 10, 18, and 29. And we were all in New York City, living in Brooklyn during the first part of the pandemic. And I think for all families, I think you all can relate. You start to really think about your values and what's important to your family. And we decided that it was right for our family to move out to Colorado. And I'm a pleasure to be here tonight with you guys. So I'm going to pass it to our next panelist, Tom Coughlin. Tom, you want to introduce yourself? You are muted.
Okay, now you can hear me. I apologize for the technical difficulty there. That's very apropos for our time in COVID and meetings. My name is Tom Coughlin. I'm the manager of behavioral health in Colorado Springs, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker by background. I have 2 school-aged children, 13, and a boy that's 13, and a daughter that's going to be 10 tomorrow. So this work is very important for me, and the impact of COVID over the last 2 years has certainly hit home. The mental health crisis has certainly impacted me personally and professionally. I think it's exposed what have been, especially in Southern Colorado, some insufficiencies in how we engage in mental health and the treatment services that are available in Southern Colorado. And it's really shined a light on that. So while it's great that mental health and behavioral health are the focus right now, it's unfortunate that sometimes it takes a crisis to do that. So it's wonderful that we're having this town hall, and I appreciate everybody for being here.
Thanks so much, Tom, for joining us from the Springs. We're going to move to Dr. Jenna Glover.
We're all having the same technical difficulties. It's great to be here this evening. So my name is Jenna Glover, and I am a clinical child psychologist who's been with Children's Hospital for the last 6 years. And in terms of my life, I have a 2 and a 4-year-old. And during the first year of the pandemic, I was so grateful I did not have school-age children because I just thought that would be so stressful. And during the second year of the pandemic, after 5 daycare closures, I have got my turn of it, and certainly felt the stress that so many parents have been enduring for so long. Professionally, I've seen 2 parts of this. I've seen a greater demand for services than I've ever seen before, especially among our adolescents. Our wait list for services is just unreal. But I've also seen more resiliency, more unique kind of coping and perspective taking among our youth than I've ever seen before. So I've seen both the hard and the really hopeful part of it.
Thanks so much, Dr. Glover. Next up is Dr. Jessica Hawks.
Hi, my name is Jessica Hawks. I am a clinical child and adolescent psychologist, and I've been here at Children since 2014. And I'm currently serving as the clinical director of our ambulatory and intensive services within the Pediatric Mental Health Institute. I am married and have twin 2-year-old boys who definitely keep me on my toes. As far as how COVID impacted me personally and professionally, I was a new mom when COVID hit us, and it was a crazy time to navigate, just being a new parent and then also having COVID on top of it. My spouse and I both continued to go to work in person throughout the pandemic, and that also just caused different challenges and stressors that we had to navigate over time. But similar to what other people have said, the mental health crisis was present before COVID, and it only just exponentially increased since the start of the pandemic. And being so passionate about this work, it only has fueled my passion even more to make sure that we are developing the right mental health services for youth in the state of Colorado and making sure that we can get them timely access. And that's important to me even more so now as a new mom, because if my kids ever need those services, I want to make sure that they can get access to them as well.
Thanks so much, Dr. Hawks. And last but not least, we have Heidi Bassfield.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heidi Bassfield, Vice President of Population Health and Advocacy here at Children's Hospital, Colorado. I've been here for a little over a decade. And one of the things, that Tom left out in his introduction, he's got the COVID beard. So I'm just going to say that is a personal addition I'm quite impressed with that I can't engage in. I also am a mom with 2 young boys, 7 and a 9-year-old. And I have joined the COVID committee at my kids' school because of the work I get to do here at the hospital, which also means I'm the least popular person in the car line as a result of that assignment. So I think I'm probably looking forward to the end of the pandemic more than most and retiring that hat. So professionally, have been really focused on really heightening the awareness of the impacts of what is an official pediatric mental health state of emergency in our state and in our country, and really trying to ensure that all of us who are experiencing this in different ways are able to bring their voice to those who can help us fix this crisis. And how we're doing that is really engaging our state leadership team, our governor, our lawmakers, those who can help us build a functioning system of youth mental health care for kids in the state, because we don't have one. And right now, the Colorado legislature is really contemplating how to spend upwards of $100 million to help us really invest in core components of a youth mental health system. So creating an effective behavioral health administration, really infusing dollars into our communities to support things like community-based crisis services, thinking about how to develop and support school-based mental health programs, how to increase capacity for kids who need more support with inpatient and residential treatment services, and then layering on top of that appropriate access to care coordination support. So that has been and will continue to be the focus. Thanks, Dr. Liam.
Thanks so much, Heidi. Let's dive right in. Dr. Hawks, you've heard Heidi talk about the youth state of emergency for mental health. Why is it such a hard time right now for kids and families? What do parents and families and caregivers need to know to get through this tough time?
Yeah, so the pandemic, as everyone knows on this call, has caused so many challenges for all of us, and children and parents have had unique things that they've had to grapple with. One of the most important things that has impacted mental health concerns across the lifespan is how socially isolated people have felt over the course of the pandemic. And there's been many other disruptions to our everyday life, including kids not being able to consistently go to school, and the disruptions for parents when it comes to work and juggling all the different hats that they always have to juggle, but even more so during the pandemic when they were serving as not only parents, but their kids' teachers and their kids' friend and their kids' therapist. And that dynamic change just caused a lot of increased stress for families, understandably so, as they tried to figure out and renegotiate these different relationship dynamics than they had ever had to deal with before. And so there's a lot of things that we have to think about as parents with regards to how we can help our kids in this time of distress. And there's a couple things that I want to highlight about ways that we can, as parents, really work to improve our relationship with our children, which is by extension going to be able to help their emotional and mental well-being. So there's a couple things I'm going to highlight here. The number one most important thing that parents can do is spend quality time with their children. And this can involve a lot of different things, having meaningful conversations, enjoying an activity together. But the real important thing here is that parents be present. And that means removing different kinds of distractions like your cell phones or multitasking. Really be with your children during those times. Another important thing to be thinking about is how we're using our attention. It's really common for any of us to have our attention pulled to the things that are frustrating or stressful. And unfortunately, what that can do is inadvertently teach kids to do those behaviors more because they know that's a way that their parent is going to be more likely to react to them. So try to catch your kids being good. Notice the things that they're doing well or that you like that they're doing, and pay attention to those things because it's going to make them more likely to want to keep doing them. Utilize effective communication skills. This can involve things like showing empathy, acknowledging how your kids are feeling. That doesn't mean that you're agreeing with how they feel. It just means that you're noticing it and labeling it. Being able to just listen to what they have to say. And then trying to come alongside them and collaboratively problem solve the different kinds of difficulties and stressors that they're encountering in their day-to-day life. And then finally, we would encourage you to have clear expectations and consequences. We know that kids thrive in that kind of a relationship where they know the boundaries and they know what happens if they break those. It's been really difficult for parents during the pandemic to do that for a number of reasons. But one of the biggest ones is that parents have had to really sit with guilt as parents that their kids have had so many disruptions to their lives. And so we've attempted to overcompensate for that and oftentimes are questioning whether it makes sense to enforce these kinds of limits. But we know that kids' mental health is actually going to do the best when they live in that kind of an environment. So we wanted to highlight just some of the most important symptoms that parents can be looking for when it comes to potential warning signs that their kids are having mental health difficulties. So some of the most common ones are being irritable or tearful, acting out or having more tantrums than they normally do, isolating more to their rooms, or not wanting to spend time with friends or family, changes to their eating or sleeping habits, and that can be increased or decreased eating and sleeping. Just not seeming as motivated to do the things that they know that they need to do, like go to school, complete their homework, and they just don't seem to enjoy the kinds of typical activities that they used to.
Dr. Glover, you want to chime in about teens?
Oh, our teens. So, in general, having a year disrupted is hard for anybody, but kids' lives are really marked in years, and huge rites of passage happen, especially for adolescents. And so if we think about the last 2 years, many kids have lost the opportunity to go through these rites of passage, to move from middle to high school, to graduate from high school, to attend school activities or sporting events that they may have been really looking forward to. And with these continued disruptions, what happens is we have an increase in the frequency and the intensity of difficult emotions. So kids are having to deal with disappointment more often, grief more often, frustration more often, being overwhelmed more often. And they don't have the benefit of having the positive emotions that come with being able to celebrate these milestones and engage in these activities. And as a result of that, one of the things that we have seen is throughout the pandemic, we've seen a steady increase in internalizing disorders, specifically anxiety and depression in our teens. And if you look at like before the pandemic, about 10 to 12% of kids who are teenagers experienced anxiety or depression at a clinical level. Now we're seeing those rates be about 24 to 25% of kids. So 1 in 4 of our teens are experiencing this. And that's shocking when we think about it. The other thing that I think is sobering is that many teens are often misdiagnosed who experience internalizing symptoms. So one of the things to be on the lookout for is that kids who are depressed when they are teenagers, often it manifests more often in irritability than it does in typical sadness. Additionally, it's very normal for kids to withdraw from family. But if your teens are withdrawing from their friends or activities they used to love, all of those really are red flags that maybe there's something more going on there. The other interesting component of this is we have this kind of primary increase in these internalizing problems of anxiety and depression, and it's been followed by an increase in maladaptive behaviors, and we call these compensatory behaviors, but kids are just trying to cope. And they're doing the best they can to try to gather some type of relief. And for some people, relief comes in gathering more control. And for some, it's letting go of control. And so what we've seen is kids developing more eating disorders, kids using substances more often. And really it's secondary to this depression and anxiety, but these are things that are happening. And sometimes parents are like, I don't understand why they're engaging in these behaviors. Oftentimes it's, I've been in distress and I need to have some sense of control, or I need to feel a sense of being able to let things go. And so we're seeing this happen at higher rates than we ever have. And again, these compensatory behaviors. So you might see your kid, binging more TV, more internet time, all these kind of things as a way to cope. But certainly our teens' lives have been very, very disrupted, and they're struggling in a way we haven't seen before.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Glover. I wonder if we could shift into some. So now we've seen some of the things that you want to pay attention to and keep a lookout on with your kids, younger kids, older kids, teens, college-age students. Now, what about some practical tips in terms of how can we help our kids and families sort of build resiliency, coping skills that are on the healthier side of that spectrum?
Yeah, so the good news is kids are very resilient, and they can respond well when we put these things in place. So whenever I talk to families, I always say that resiliency has many components, but it has really kind of three things as the foundation. And you're like, three things, there's four things on my slide. I'll put them together. So kind of sleeping and eating, those core physiological needs, they cannot be overstated. Most children are sleep deprived. So teens need a great deal of sleep, and often they're not getting that. Young kids need a great deal of sleep, and they're not getting that. So that really, I tell parents, that is your first priority, is get good sleep locked in. Make sure that kids are getting consistent nutrition, and that includes hydration. We live at a high elevation, and our ability to manage stress is compromised when we are dehydrated. So, if your children aren't doing well, remember, have I watered the children lately? They need that water. So those are very small things, but they're really the foundation for physical and mental health. The other thing is making sure that kids are experiencing a range of positive emotions and getting physical activity. And so making sure that they are moving each day. And even on really, really cold snow days, can they get out for 10 minutes and just play in the snow and make some snow angels? But there is tremendous research that shows physical activity and outside time is so helpful. Outside time helps calibrate your sleep. So your kids will sleep better. So even when it's really cold, remember, I will get my benefit tonight for that. And we know that long-term, kids who spend time outside as young people tend to have better outcomes and less mental health problems in adulthood. So it's such a powerful and easy intervention. The other thing that's really important is consistently checking in with your kids. And so making this a ritual. How are things going? What's working for you? And what are you struggling with? Always ask both. Some of your kids will have a tendency to not talk about the hard, and some of your kids will have a tendency to only talk about the hard. So help them balance and invite them to talk about both. And sometimes they'll just shut you down, but if you do this consistently over time, they will know that they always have that invitation. The other component, this is a two-part skill. Consistently ask about the hard and the good. And when they tell you about the hard, validate it. Tell them what you hear. That sounds difficult. You're really struggling right now. And resist the urge to fix it. That's our number one thing. We just want to problem solve. Kids don't need that. Kids need to be heard. And once they're heard, then you can decide together, is there something that you need in order to move forward with this difficulty? And then finally, crisis happen. So just like having a first aid kit in your car is helpful with Band-Aids and medicine, create a crisis distress tolerance box. So knowing that your kids will be in distress. And so you can just create a little box together. Things that can go on this are things like, Play-Doh, finger paints, fidget toys. I have one in my office. So, being able to have Legos to put together, photographs, cards with important things on them. These are things that in any given moment, if your kid needs to be distracted, they can pull out their box. This is a fun family activity. It's good for adults to have these, but you don't want to wait for somebody to be in crisis to try to find the things they need. You want to plan before a crisis happens. And for all of us, it's not a matter of if a crisis will happen, it's just when.
Thanks so much, Dr. Glover. We started a family routine of highs and lows at dinner and try to have as many family meals as possible and our bedtime check-ins. And I think you're right. It's just, sometimes they don't want to say anything, or it's all lows or it's all highs, right? But just having that consistent routine as best you can in our changing schedules. Dr. Hawks, I'm wondering, how do we help our kids build resiliency in the middle of crisis? This is year 3 of the COVID pandemic, with many, many other sort of challenges and losses and traumas and challenges over the last couple of years. So how do we help build that resiliency in the middle of crisis?
Yeah, it definitely has been a tough couple of years for kids and adults alike. The really great thing is that kids have already been demonstrating to us over the last several years just how incredibly resilient they are. They've been doing things that I think none of us ever would have thought they'd ever have to do in their lifetime, and they've been doing an incredible job with it. So even in the midst of a crisis, kids have risen to the occasion, but there are additional things that we can do to help build their resiliency at this time. One of the best things that we can do as adults is just give our kids opportunities to try out new things and have it just be outside the reach of what they're normally accustomed to doing or what they're used to doing, and let them just try on opportunities to be more independent. And one of the most important things for parents to remember is that it's okay if they don't always succeed. In fact, there's a lot of really important life lessons that kids learn when they don't succeed, including the idea that we can persevere in those moments and the idea that we can problem solve how to make it go better the next time. And those are really important life skills for kids to learn. Another important thing for parents to do is just normalize that life can be hard sometimes and that we are going to experience hard emotions and that it's okay to not always be okay. And one of the things that we all tend to do when we're having a hard time or when different situations are becoming really difficult is we tend to want to get out of those situations and avoid them. But unfortunately, that usually makes things worse and it makes us feel worse. So one of the things parents can try to help support their kids in doing is approach those difficult emotions, approach those difficult situations. Because when kids do that, they learn more often than not that they actually have the ability to get through those situations in a much more successful way than they probably gave themselves credit for. Another thing parents can do is focus on praising your kids' efforts, not the outcomes. It's not as important that your kid brings home a straight A report card as it is that they really fully immerse themselves in learning and enjoying that process. And so we want to make sure that we communicate to our kids that we just want you to be trying. We don't always have to have you excelling. And then finally, be a good role model. The number one way our kids learn is by watching. And the most important people in their lives are their parents and other important caregivers. And so it's really important that we pay attention to what our kids are watching us do. And if we're having a hard time, if we're feeling stressed, try to show up in ways that our kids can watch how we can navigate those moments effectively, making sure that we're engaging in good self-care, that we're talking about how we're feeling, and that we're engaging in those same approach-oriented kinds of attempts to deal with stressful situations that we're asking our kids to.
Such a good reminder, Dr. Hawks. Right? They're watching us always, which is a little scary as a parent too. Let me turn to Tom down in Colorado Springs. You know, we often talk a lot in our field about how many of the foundations of a healthy, physically healthy, mentally healthy, emotionally healthy childhood really begin at home. And with the family. And so how it's so important, right? That healthy kids need healthy parents and families. And it's really a stressful time. It's been so stressful for every family I know, right? That has not been untouched by these last few years. So can you talk a little bit about that, Tom?
Absolutely. To add on to what Dr. Hawks was saying, the last 2 years, our homes have become offices, our homes have become schools, and adults have lost their windows to practice self-care. They've lost their normal schedules to take a break and to increase their own resilience and be able to de-stress. And I think what has happened is that we have, adults and children kind of omnipresent together during the day in these stressful situations. And the children have experienced, all this visceral stress from the last 2 years of uncertainty, of changing schedules, of adults not knowing what's happening, of illness, of vaccine worry, et cetera. And this is really, as they've been a captive audience in these homes, has really impacted them. So it's really important to, really model and mirror to our children that self-regulation. And I think that it's time for us as parents to really try to take back that time for ourselves and say, this is what I'm doing. This is part of my daily schedule. This is the time for me, because I think a lot of us as parents have lost that. And so if your kids are witnessing us stressed out all the time, they're going to absorb that. They're going to be stressed out. And that's those rising levels of anxiety and depression that we've talked about. There's just a lot of uncertainty in the world. So prioritize that, schedule it in, work with your family, work with your partners to make sure that you are taking that time.
Such a good reminder for all of us, Tom. Thank you so much. Dr. Glover, Tom mentioned something about being on screens, and we're all on a screen right now, aren't we? So some of you are calling in from your phones, from your tablets, from your laptops. Maybe some of you are watching the live stream on our news partners. Can you talk to us a little bit, Dr. Glover, about healthy screen time? I mean, really, we're using it for work and for school and to game and to connect and for entertainment and to relax, to doom scroll, right? So what's healthy, what's not healthy for kids at different ages?
This is probably the question I get most often, given what the pandemic has done to our screen habits. And honestly, in our field, our thinking on this is evolving. And one of the most important ways that it's evolving is that we are really moving away from this idea of a prescription amount of time. Now, you can go online and you can find from, pediatric psychologist recommended amounts of time. But really what we're switching to now is, rather than worrying about the number of hours, worry about, are the foundational things happening? So these are the 4 things. I might say more because I often say bullets, then I go over. But are they sleeping and they eating? Are they taking time to connect with others? Are they engaging in physical activity? And are they getting their chores and homework done? If you can say yes to those 4 things, screen time is not concerning. So make sure that the foundation is in place and don't get so caught up in hours. But if for some reason one of those 4 things isn't in place, screen time should be looked at and it should be potentially reduced. So there's not a one size fits all, but we want to look at the child, what their needs are, the context, and the quality of the material that they're looking at, which gets to the second point. So screens are neither good nor bad. There's positive and there's negative things that come from them. These are things that we're intaking all day long. So I like to think of them as digital calories. Some are more nutritious than others. And what we know is the most nutritious is active screen time. And active screen time is where kids are engaging in creating content, where they're engaging in interacting with somebody else online and having conversations. But it gives them a chance to explore their identity, to express themselves, and to learn critical thinking skills. Passive screen time tends to be actually quite toxic, and it's associated with increased levels of anxiety and depression. We've all done a little passive screen time where you're scrolling on Facebook or TikTok, and all of a sudden 3 hours have gone by. That's passive. You're just taking it in, you're not engaging, and you're not creating. So make sure your kids are engaging in active screen time and try to reduce the amount of passive screen time. And then finally, you want to encourage healthy media habits. Your kids are digital citizens and you need to teach them how to be effective digital citizens. A helpful way to think about this is, just like your kids learn to ride a bike or to drive a car, you start with really strong safety measures and you let them practice. And so you give them a little bit of a chance to be online, but with a lot of restrictions. And so we know that young kids don't need to be on social media, and really limiting that and making sure that they're not. As kids do go onto social media, making sure that they have limited social media accounts, preferably 1, no more than 2. We know the more social media accounts a child has to manage, the higher likelihood is their risk for depression. So just thinking about, as they practice and they have these skills, giving them more freedom, just like you would. So now they can drive the car without you present, but they can only do it during the daytime. So thinking about, how do you create that safety? And then the most important part is, we know that with riding a bike or driving a car, we're very clear to kids about what are the dangerous parts of it. You never ride in the street. You never drive without your seatbelt on. You never post pictures of yourself without your clothes on. You never send text messages you wouldn't want your principal, your teacher, your grandparents to see. And you have these conversations not once, but ongoing and frequently. So again, thinking about, how are you developing and scaffolding that, limiting how much exposure they have, but also validating this is an important part of their life. It's not a bad thing, but there's some of it that's more healthy than others.
Jen, I feel like everyone should go through those healthy habits, adults and children alike. Definitely want to transition a little bit, because Tom, you manage our emergency department down in Colorado Springs, and it's such a devastating and sad time, especially as you're meeting with families in the emergency rooms whose children are really facing mental health crises, probably in the hardest of times for families. So you offer some safety considerations for parents who are worried about their children, who want to make sure their home is as safe as possible?
Absolutely. I think it's important for us to try and remember as parents that when children and teenagers are going through drama with their peers or relationship loss or cyberbullying, that those emotions they're experiencing are so much more intense than what we experience as adults. And part of the complicated aspect of children and teenagers is they don't have that executive functioning. So when a crisis is happening, when they're in emotional distress, they can become highly impulsive. And this doesn't make them bad. This doesn't mean that they have a problem. It's just impulsivity, and controlling that impulsivity is just part of adolescence. And so it's best to safety proof our homes. And even if we don't have a child that we feel like is at high risk, just removing those temptations from children who might be having a really horrible, rotten, very, very bad, no good day, by locking up firearms, by securing medications, prescription medications and over-the-counter medications, by safely storing toxic cleaning supplies. I mean, these are the tragedies we see in the emergency departments, and more often than not, we're talking with parents that are saying, I had no idea this happened so fast, and that's tragic. So it is important to just remove these risks so that you can have peace of mind and your child can be safe.
Thank you so much, Tom. I think you've got even more resources here. If parents or family members or teachers or anybody who's worried about a child wants to reach out, where would you recommend that they turn to?
Absolutely. There are a lot of existing resources in especially our front range communities. And the first place to go is always a pediatrician, and to start with them and get those appropriate referrals. If you have concerns about your child's behavior, if you have concerns about their safety, the emergency department at Children's is now an appropriate place to go to get recommendations from professionals and to make sure that you're accessing the right level of care. It's also important to understand that in our communities, we do have 24/7 crisis centers, and many of our communities have mobile crisis teams that are accessed through our 911 system or through the sheriff's department. And those are mobile teams with therapists that can come out to your home and de-escalate a conflict. They can assess your child for safety and make recommendations. I also, a lot of us have seen the expansion of telehealth therapy resources, and that many therapists and mental health centers in our communities are using telehealth therapy. This is something that I think children and adolescents oftentimes do better at than we do as adults. And they're living in this electronic world for a lot longer than we have been. And it works for them. We also have the Colorado Crisis Line. This is a line that's accessible 24/7. Your child can call if they're having any sort of crisis and talk with a licensed clinician and hopefully de-escalate and get some direction on where to go next. And then also, I think it's important for parents to socialize with their children, the Safe to Tell number. And this can be if your child is worried about their friends, if they're worried about a comment that one of their friends has made about not being safe, they can always reach out. And then that starts the wheels in motion of making sure that that child is safe and notifying their family.
Thanks so much, Tom, for sharing all of these great resources. Sometimes it's helpful if you're really worried about your child, go ahead and put some of these numbers in your phone. Many of you might have family practice docs or nurse practitioners that you see, school-based health teams. I think those are all great people to reach out to as a first call if you're worried. And I want to just give it back to a little bit to Heidi, because there's so much happening around youth mental health at the state level. Heidi, how can people help as citizens and community members, as professionals and parents? Like what are the ways in which people can really help advance youth mental health for the state of Colorado?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Liao. This is an amazing time in our history. Normally, I would tell you it's harder to get the attention of lawmakers on topics like youth mental health. But right now, we have hundreds of millions of dollars flowing into our state, our local governments, and even our schools to really think about how we build a comprehensive system of youth mental health. And that is an incredible opportunity for each of you to be able to weigh in and talk about what's important. And this is actually easier than you would think. So you don't have to have a policy white paper to pick up the phone, to send an email and talk about what's important to you. If you can't remember anything else, what is so critical right now is to tell your story. Tell people about your experience. What have you seen? What has worked? What hasn't worked? Because as we are building a brand new system of care, the only way it's going to work is if people understand how a system responds to your unique experiences. So whether you're a teacher, a bus driver, a coach, the parent, the grandparent, whoever you are, whatever that experience is, lawmakers need to hear from you. We need this system to work for you. So pick up the phone, call a county commissioner, call a city council member, talk to your school board members, call a state legislature, and send those emails, share your story and get the word out, because now is a time. They want to hear from you. They're listening. They want that input. There's also an opportunity to join the Children's Hospital Colorado Child Health Champ Network, where we send out lots of updates and really great information about policy issues and how you can do something with just a click of the mouse. So we put the information here on the slide. If you're interested, please sign up. We'd love to have your engagement, because the more of us who are talking about what we need for our kids and our youth, the more successful we're going to be in the weeks and the months ahead.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Appreciate that, the guidance for all of us. So I just want to remind everybody, we are going to have a live Q&A. And so please feel free to chat your questions. You can just type them right in there. No questions too small. I learned something from all of your questions and all of these, our amazing team member panelists. So first couple questions that are coming through, I'll probably start this one with Jenna Glover, since you mentioned it, but then panelists feel free to hop in and chime in. So the first one is, for the crisis survival kits, what are your suggestions for teens? You mentioned a few things. What are your suggestions for teens?
So I would work collaboratively with your teen to see what they like, because every time I have a teen do this, they put different things in them. If you want a starting point, if you just Google self-soothing boxes or distress crisis boxes, there are great links online that have list of things that you could potentially put in a box. But I think, what are a few things that can distract? So again, can it be like a puzzle, a crossword, a small book that they can read? Things that soothe their senses. So smells, having things in there like maybe putty, having like maybe a great piece of chocolate in there that you can savor. We don't want to encourage, like overeating to cope, but just slow eating. And then again, a few sentimental things. So that might be a note or affirmations that have come from friends or family. It could be a special, in my box, I have a compass from my grandpa that it helps me remember just to keep my direction safe in life. So ask your teen, Google that, and you'll get a lot of different ideas. But I encourage you as a family, like, put it together. It tends to be a really fun thing. It's something that can be added to. I know a lot of kids like having journals in there. Some kids who are very artistic, making sure that they have the tools that they need for whatever medium they like to use. But those are some of the suggestions that I have. I do think programming these crisis numbers in your kids' phones is a great idea, but also having just those in the box is helpful. So it's just a reminder that if you're in crisis, there are people who love you and will help you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Glover. This is a very common question we get asked. What happens when you try to take the devices away? If your child becomes argumentative, combative, even when it's time to turn it out, turn out the lights, turn off the device. Do you have any tips for folks? And even like parents, while they're chatting, that it's almost like it's an addiction, right? Or a drug. So how do you handle that? And for any of our team members here, please feel free to jump in.
kick us off and then feel free to jump in, team. So I think the most important thing parents can do is think about what they can do on the front end to help avoid those kinds of power struggles when it comes to screen time. So one of the most helpful things to do is to have those clear expectations about when do you have to turn in your screens, and having some consistency that like every night at 10 o'clock, everybody turns in their phones and they stay plugged in to charge overnight on the counter. Also giving people, your kids, warnings. So, hey, in 30 minutes, we're going to have to start getting ready for bed, and just prepping them so that they don't feel ambushed and they're right in the middle of a really important conversation with their friend, or they're in the middle of beating a certain level of a video game, that they know that that's coming. And then if your kid does escalate and really get upset when you ask them to turn in screens or you set limits on screens, again, making sure that you're modeling the kind of behaviors that you want your kids to be engaging in as well. So you want to stay calm. You can label the emotions they're experiencing. I understand that you feel frustrated, and then still follow through and be consistent, because what can happen sometimes is when kids get really upset, parents might pull back a little bit and not necessarily enforce what they've just said. And that's only going to encourage your child to escalate again the next time. So we have to make sure that we really stay consistent and follow through once we've set that expectation.
Thanks so much, Dr. Hawks. It's tough, right? You get the big emotions, you feel like you're doing something wrong, and really it's just stay calm and stay the course, right? Follow through with your word and then try it again next night. We've got a great question here from one of our high school counselors who chatted. This counselor said that they've got many families at school. The students have people who are sick at home, and several people who are dying or have died, and they feel like their students are getting numb, or losing or don't know how to grieve. Do you have any advice or guidance for our high school counselor participant on the call?
Tom, were you getting on mute? You can talk.
Well, I think that's a great question. And I think through all of this trauma and loss, we've all experienced, dissociation, numbness, and that can be harmful over time. Like Manli said, we're entering year 3 of this. I think that the part of this that I find that's important is that we have teachers, school counselors, that are willing to be present and sit and be present with these students and give them opportunities to grieve. Particularly in Southern Colorado, we have an issue with being able to have accessible outpatient therapy, and that'd be the ideal for anyone who's going through acute grief and loss with a family member. And I'll talk to families that will tell me they're waiting months, and that's a problem that we're going to help solve, and we're working on passionately right now. But when those resources aren't available, school counselors and teachers and parents and other supportive adults, coaches are so important. The fact that they're just taking the time to be present with those kids, allow them to express those emotions if they can, and being able to have those difficult conversations. Because I think it's, most of us pull back from those. If we don't do this for a living, it can be very uncomfortable, and we feel like we're interfering in a personal family matter. But this has gotten all of us into each other's business, because we're all going through this together. And so I think that's what I would recommend, is be present, try to have those conversations if you can, try to point those students at the appropriate resources if you can, and watch out for those, crisis symptoms where they might need a higher level of care, and that'd be a conversation with their family.
Thanks so much, Tom. And you definitely actually echoed some of the comments that I'm seeing in the chat too, about families who've tried to reach out to crisis services, and it's usually like a one or a few visit sort of interaction. It is really complicated right now. You are absolutely right, to the person who's on the call, and several people. It's hard to navigate the system right now to get the kids the help we need. That's why we are all working on the advocacy front. We're all working to look at how can we increase access to long-term longer term therapy supports and counseling, psychiatrists and doctors if you need them, and how do we embed those supports everywhere kids are in schools and primary care and communities. I got a really great question here about, particularly in Colorado, teens have incredibly easy access to substances, particularly marijuana. So do you have any suggestions on how to talk to teens about the risk of substance abuse, and particularly marijuana, especially for teens who are already experiencing mental health concerns?
Yeah, so this is a great question, especially because use of substances is really going to potentially deepen and worsen those mental health problems. So I would say that there's kind of two parts to this. So again, having open conversations with your teens, oftentimes I encourage when was the last time you tried marijuana? And just, the fact that kids might, rather than are you doing this or not? Asking kids, what is your understanding of these things? Is it something that appeals to you? Why does it appeal to you? And really trying to approach it, which I know is super hard, but from a place of curiosity rather than a place of fear. And when you approach these conversations with teenagers from a place of curiosity, you can understand, what are they getting from this? Why do they want to use them, those substances? Because they're getting something from it, and acknowledging that that is valid. But also, letting them know, your concerns. I'm concerned because, I know that using these things could make your depression worse. Additionally, rely on your providers and say, would you help provide some education to my teen about frequent marijuana use? And a provider is a great person to have those conversations. I can more easily have a conversation with a teen of how much do you want to use, and what does your use look like over time, and what would be the long-term consequences of that? And have you thought of that? Sometimes that's an easier conversation for a provider to have than a parent. But just again, as parents, be curious, talk to your teens about what they understand about those things, if they'd be open to hearing your perspective about those things, and having that conversation in a curious way rather than a fearful way.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Glover. My goodness, our chat is really on fire here. I just want to assure folks, if we don't get to your questions by the end of this hour, we can answer those questions offline. So we'll save the chat. I'm going to make these guys record answers to all your questions. Let me just, there's a couple here. There's one really thoughtful comment from one of our participants wanting us to just reassure folks, and I'm going to do that for you guys now, that if you're worried about suicide, that your child is thinking about harming themselves or wishing they weren't alive, or have had a friend that has died by suicide, or concerned about that, that one of the most important things you can do as a parent or as a teacher or as a family member is to actually check in with your child directly about that. You will not be putting thoughts into their heads. Actually, in many of these cases, when we point out and just point blank ask directly, are you thinking about harming yourself? Are you worried about suicide? Kids usually feel quite relieved, actually, to be able to share that with an adult that they trust and that they know will take care of them. And so please, if you're worried about it, if you're thinking about it, there's lots of tips too we can offer as well, but really just being, as Jenna said, just caring and thoughtful and curious and loving in the way that we ask, but also direct. Right? It's hard. This is a really hard topic. So I just want to say that out loud since you so thoughtfully put that in the chat. School anxiety. Tell us a little bit, because, snow days, quarantine days, off and on of school. Can you talk a little bit about school anxiety and kids who are nervous about going back to school?
I think it's really normal to feel anxious about going back to school. If you think about just how disrupted kids' schooling experiences have been for the last couple of years, and then they start going back to school, and then there's the back and forth and closures and all the different conversations and even arguments that adults in their lives are having about whether it's safe to be back to school or whether they need to stay out of school. It can feel really difficult to navigate all of that on top of just all the anxieties that kids have to experience in normal day-to-day circumstances around peers and getting good grades and all the things that they're navigating. So I think first and foremost, just normalizing that it is okay and it is common for your child to be feeling a little anxious. And I'm sure you guys are noticing a theme in a lot of the recommendations that we're giving. But one of the best things you can do as a parent is just check in with your kid and have a conversation with them about how are you feeling about going back to school? Let's talk about what your worries are and just listen about what they are actually feeling anxious about. One of the things I'm always struck by when I work with kids is that I'll think I know what they're going to be anxious about. And then I actually ask them and open up the question a little bit more open-ended. And I'm constantly surprised that what I think they're anxious about is not what they're anxious about. And I think the same could be true for parents. So ask it open-ended. How are you feeling about going back to school? What worries are you having about going back to school? And then just listen. And you'll find that the conversation oftentimes just naturally leads itself to a place where your child feels a lot better just having been able to have that conversation with you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Hawks. I've seen a lot of school folks on this chat as well. So thank you to all of our educators and school counselors. I also just wanted to remind everybody that you can always turn to your school counselor or resources if you have questions about communication and friendships and learning and anxiety, changes in behavior. I see a lot of parents here as well and family members talking about just how hard it is to access services and feeling like they did something wrong. Maybe I'm gonna end with this question actually. For all the parents whose kids are struggling that feel like they're doing something wrong, can you please, let's go across the panel, address these parents directly.
I can certainly start, Ronley. That's a great question. It saddens me to hear that parents would be feeling that way, but I can completely understand. And this is, we've gone through a pandemic that hasn't occurred for 100 years, and this is not your fault. We weren't prepared for this. We didn't have the mental health infrastructure in place. And I don't think that is exclusive to Colorado. I think everywhere in the nation is experiencing that. And when children's lives get disrupted so much and they're missing those milestones, they're missing those important events that we feel is so imperative to their development and joy, it's hard for us not to feel guilty. So I just want to assure parents that people are doing the best they can, and we're going to come out of this. We're going to have a sense of normalcy again. And search for joy, search for those things you can do with your child, and spend that mindful time being present with your child, asking these questions, having these conversations, because that's ultimately what's going to be the way out of this, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Tom. Any last words of wisdom or tips from our panelists tonight? I have some resources and an exciting event to share as well before we wrap up. But Heidi, Dr. Hawks, Dr. Glover, anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, the one thing I might say, Dr. Liao, is just to remember that, any good system is a lot like a power grid. When you go to turn on the light switch, the lights come on. You don't have to put effort into understanding all the things that have to come together for your lights to turn on. And yet, right now, we don't have a functioning mental health power grid. And so we're really in that phase of putting the wiring in the wall. So please know that as you're facing challenges with trying to access the support that you want for yourself, for your children, for the people you care about in your life, that it's not your fault, that when you turn on the switch, the lights don't come on. And please keep trying.
Yeah, and I hope you'll feel like, this is kind of it's like it's dinner time, right? I hope you feel like we're part of your kitchen table, your family conversation. These are amazing folks I get to work with, and I think we'd love to have more of these types of forums as well. So let me give you a couple of resources here. The next slide, Friday Night Lights, shining a light on mental health. I know this is in May, but something to put on your calendars, because it's going to be a wonderful event again with Ben Garland from the Broncos, and it'll be Friday at Empower Field at Mile High. So come out, do some steps, raise some funds and awareness for mental health and reduce stigma in our communities. You can see the email down below. And let me go to do we have this? Oh, great. So here are the mental health resources through our Children's Hospital of Colorado website. So please take a look at all of the mental health articles that we have available for parents at childrenscolorado.org/mental health resources, as well as a number of tip sheets for keeping your children and yourselves sane and healthy, and as well as resilient as we can be. And so you'll see a number of tip sheets around COVID, teen tips, supporting mental health, and really want to say a big thank you to all of you for taking this time with us. Your questions and comments are incredibly thoughtful. Sorry we couldn't get to every one of them, but we will do our best. Let's save this chat so we can send some responses as well through our website and social media channels. So thanks to everybody. Have a great night. Thank you to our panelists and our hosts, and hope to see you again soon.